Trump's much-anticipated speech left the key question unanswered, and the fact that he couldn't be precise over an end date for the war left the stock markets in a spin. Oil prices rising by at least 5%. Ellen Gainsford has this.
In a primetime address, US President Donald Trump gave a much-anticipated update on the Iran war that ultimately revealed little new information. Sending mixed messages, he claimed that the conflict was nearly over, while also saying it was set to intensify.
I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Trump claimed that regime change has effectively already occurred in Iran and described the hardliners currently in charge as much more reasonable. But the US president also warned that the US would target Iran's oil facilities and electricity plants if a deal isn't made soon. Trump had previously set out US aims as including destroying Iran's missile production and navy, reducing Iran's regional proxies' power, and ensuring Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. But critics say he's moved the goalposts on other objectives. While he had once demanded that Iran reopen the Strait of Hormuz, on Wednesday he again appeared to wash his hands of the issue.
The United States imports almost no oil through the Hormuz Strait and won't be taking any in the future. We don't need it. The countries of the world that do receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage. They must cherish it.
Trump's speech offered little reassurance to global oil markets, and the price of the benchmark Brent crude jumped by almost 5% following his remarks. Also on Wednesday, on social media, Trump claimed that Iran's president had requested a ceasefire, an assertion that Iran's foreign ministry subsequently called false and baseless. For now, Tehran shows no signs of backing down. Shortly after the speech, Israel said it was working once again to intercept Iranian missiles.
Just to give you some news about the effect of this worldwide, we're hearing that Pakistan rising the price of petrol by 43%, the price of diesel by 55%. That would give you petrol at $1.88 a litre in a country where the average wage is round about $4.50 per day. That gives you a sense of how consumers in Pakistan are being affected, and this is a pattern repeated across the world. Let's get more analysis about what has been said, what is happening, and of course the words of Donald Trump. Ivo Daalder joins us, who's a former US ambassador to NATO and senior fellow at the Belfer Center at Harvard University. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. I'd be interested to get your take, your thoughts, your interpretations on Donald Trump's speech.
You know, it was a strange speech. I think everybody was expecting either a clear signal of escalation, that ground troops would start to be employed in order to achieve the objectives that the president has set out, or a sense that perhaps he would declare victory and go home. He did neither. He said we had won, but we were going to continue to bomb for another 2 to 3 weeks without really understanding what is for. And I think that's been the problem now for 32 days. Why are we at war? All of the reasons that have been laid out by the president have been contradicted by the president. We were originally going to go to war because of regime change. We wanted the people to rise up. The people haven't risen up, and the regime that has indeed remained in power is now more hardline and more determined to maintain power than ever before. The people in power are the ones that were shooting at the people. This is not a nice regime that is there. He said that we were going to go and make sure that the nuclear weapons would never be used again. But then in his speech, he said, well, we don't have to worry about that because we accomplished that last June. So why go to war in February? He said that the strait needed to be open in the truth post that you just put there. But then he said it will be magically open. And if not, others are responsible for that. He has declared that the Navy and the Air Force have been destroyed, but the Navy and the Air Force was never the problem. The kinds of interferences by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy to go after shipping in the Gulf has not yet been degraded. And the ballistic missile threat, as we see, continues, as do drone threats. So you do have to wonder, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? Why do you think a continuation of 2 to 3 weeks, whatever that means, will achieve something that we haven't achieved already? And I think that is the problem with the president's speech, and he wasn't convincing to the world, and he wasn't, frankly, convincing to the American people.
Indeed, the stock markets, which he prizes, of course, so grateful, so gratefully to him, basically reacted the way that he wasn't wanting them to do so, of course, with oil prices rising. And as we were just saying, Pakistan boosting its prices by 43% on petrol, 55% on diesel. This pattern being repeated across the board, across the globe, as different countries cope in different kinds of ways. Can we talk about the military aspects of this? Because, as you were just saying, Mr. Ambassador, the whole concept of going into this war was at one point to try to rescue the Iranian people from a regime that was oppressing them. Now, that aspect that seems to have been forgotten completely. The other aims and objectives seem to change on a day-to-day basis, or even maybe by an hour-to-hour basis. So in terms of the military strategy, with more personnel going to the region, what is your sense about what happens next?
I don't know. He didn't talk about ground troops, and you would expect the president of the United States, if he was going to put troops in danger by putting them on the ground, that he would prepare the American people for that. In fact, that's what presidents have always done. In many ways, this speech that he gave was the first national address to the American people. When the war started, he released a strange video that he had taped in the middle of the night with a baseball cap on and taped from Mar-a-Lago and not from the Oval Office. And so we don't know what the next step is. What we are getting is almost a repeat of Vietnam. We are now hearing not body counts, but how many targets have been hit. Every day we hear more targets have been hit. What are these targets? What is the destruction of those targets mean in terms of the political objectives of the Iranian regime and the political capability of the Iranian regime that we are supposedly affecting? It seems like we're just bombing for bombing's sake. He talked about bombing them back in the Stone Age. We're talking about 92 million people, a country 3 times larger than France in terms of its size. Do we really think that it is appropriate in the 21st century to talk about bombing a country in the Stone Age? And for what? What are we punishing the people of Iran for? And again, we have a president here and an administration that seems to be enamored with the use of force, but has forgotten why we use force. As the famous Prussian General Karl von Clausewitz said, war is politics by other means, but this is just war for war's sake. And I'm afraid we therefore don't know when it's going to be over, because we don't know what the goal is that is supposed to be achieved.
Trump, of course, campaigned on not getting the United States involved in never-ending wars. He campaigned on the slogan of America First, and obviously since being in power, as well as calling for the Nobel Peace Prize, he's been waging war, it seems, at will across various theatres in the globe, including Iran right now. He's also had some very negative remarks to make about NATO, and he's obviously talked about the possibility, which he says is almost a certainty, of him pulling the United States out of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. From your position, Mr. Ambassador, as a former US NATO ambassador, what is your sense of all this?
Well, it's well known that Trump has been antipathetic to NATO for much of his life, and he reminds it that he's been talking against NATO and believing that NATO has been a burden rather than a benefit to the United States for well over a quarter of a century. Remember, in 2016, he came to office and said NATO was obsolete. And so in that sense, it's not surprising. I do think that what we have seen over the past 15 months is a president and an administration that have in every single way tried to undermine NATO. Yes, the NATO countries have agreed to increase defense spending, which is necessary and important. They're mainly doing it because they no longer think the United States is a reliable ally. The United States has sided with with Russia against Ukraine, diplomatically, militarily, and in other ways in terms of sanctions and economic benefits. The United States has threatened, the president has threatened to take over a part of NATO territory, Greenland, that is a part of the NATO treaty and part of the Kingdom of Denmark. This is under the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark, one of our longest allies in the alliance. And now he is threatening to walk away from NATO altogether. Something he tried to do in 2018 was stopped from doing from the people who surrounded himself, the Defense Secretary, the Chief of Staff, the National Security Advisor, all argued strongly against it. He no longer is surrounded by people who in any way are interested in talking Donald Trump out of anything that he wants to do. And indeed, both the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense have been relatively negative about NATO in the last few days. So I do worry that he may take steps either to fundamentally reduce America's commitment to NATO or indeed even try to step out of NATO. And that would be bad for not only NATO, bad not only for Europe, but above all, bad for the United States, because NATO is not a charity that the United States engages in. NATO is a military alliance that serves America's fundamental security purpose. A secure and free Europe is fundamental to a secure and free United States.
Mr. Ambassador, very briefly, Strait of Hormuz meeting today, chaired by the UK Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, Keir Starmer's idea, clearly Emmanuel Macron in there as well. Donald Trump's criticised Europe on the Strait of Hormuz issue. Very briefly, can you see a resolution coming from what's been discussed today in London? Word perhaps of a humanitarian corridor for oil?
Yeah, I don't see it happening. I think militarily this is not going to be opened except by the United States, and Donald Trump has made very clear that he's not going to open the strait. The strait was open before the war. It's closed since then, something that should have been part of it. I think we're entering an era in which Iran will determine what goes through the strait, and Iran will benefit from that purpose. And that is one of the great strategic consequences of this unnecessary and in many ways illegal war.
Ivo Daalder, thank you very much indeed for joining us and sharing your analysis with us here on France 24. Former US Ambassador to NATO and Senior Fellow at the Belfer Center at Harvard University. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us.